Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. My guest today is journalist and author Sam Quinones. Sam lived for 10 years as a freelance writer in Mexico, where he wrote his first two books, returning to the United States in 2004 to work for the LA Times, covering immigration, drug trafficking, neighborhood stories, and gangs. In 2014, he resigned from the Times to return to freelancing, working for publications including National Geographic, the New York Times, and Los Angeles Magazine. He's the author of three books, including Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic, which appeared on a lot of Best of the Year Book Award lists and also won the National Book Critics Circle Award for nonfiction. He's spoken about the crisis in many venues, including interviews on two of my personal favorite podcasts, Mark Maron's WTF and Russ Roberts' Econ Talk, and he recently testified on the opioid crisis before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Sam Quinones, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You know, before we get to the opioid crisis, I'd like to ask you about your time in Mexico. You know, many Americans, I think, have some pretty strong views about Mexico, especially when it comes to issues like immigration, gangs, and drugs. But, you know, not many Americans have spent much time in that country, let alone the decade that you lived and worked there. And so I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about why you went to live in Mexico and what you learned from the experience and how it's informed your writing.
Well, I went down there really because at first I went down there just to study a little Spanish. My Spanish was rudimentary and I wanted to improve it to become a better reporter. I was in California at the time and I was really felt that if I didn't know Spanish, I was not going to be marketable as a reporter and I was going to lose out on a lot of stories that I felt could learn about. When I went down there, I found a job at a magazine quite unexpectedly. And so ended up, and I stayed, and that brought me to Mexico permanently, and that magazine failed about a year later, and I became a freelancer. So I went down for 3 months, stayed for 10 years, and wrote two books about the country. And mostly I wrote, it just awakened, first of all, it was a massive, beautiful adventure. It was just so fun. A lot of stuff was happening in Mexico that was very positive, very exciting. There was the end of a one-party state, very corrupt thing that had run the country for many, many years. I began to focus not really on drugs. I began to focus on immigration. I think that I felt that was the major a huge topic. And I began to go to all the states that were known for mass exodus of immigrants. Went to a lot of little villages. A couple of things helped. One was Mexico allowed me to become more of a long-form narrative writer that I wanted to be, and so the stories led to that. I mean, that you could create amazing narratives. I felt from stories you just would happen upon very, very casually sometimes. But it was like there was this a gold mine of stories out there. But it also got me into a lot of the villages where immigrants come from, the small villages, the ranchos, where people, most of our the origins of most of the migrants in the United States from Mexico, these small villages. So I knew these places very well by the time I left Mexico, and my first two books have a lot of stories about them, in fact. And that helped a lot. It helped me become the kind of writer I wanted to be, which is more of a narrative writer, but also got me into a very, very important part of the world that is very important for the United States, which is the small Mexican village, because so many of our migrants come from there. Now, I would say I was there during a very different time in Mexico. I would not be able to do what I did right now because of the violence. I traveled all over Mexico. I didn't own a car. I traveled by bus the whole time, and it was very easy to do that. Very cheap, very easy to do that. You go to small towns and hi there, and people would talk to you, look at you a little weird, and then you got to know you. They would, after a while, it was very easy to learn what the story was you were trying to find out about. That is not the case anymore, and particularly in several of the states I used to spend a lot of time. Michoacan is one. I used to go there a lot, and I'm terrified of going there now. I just won't go. So there's a lot of that. It brought me to write about deeper stories, longer form stories, and stories that had to do with the villages where most of the migrants in the United States come from.
I'd like to thank our first sponsor, Dollar Shave Club. You know, you've heard Jay and me talk about the amazing shave we get from our Dollar Shave Club razors, especially when we use them with their Dr. Carver's shave butter. And now they have even more products for your daily routine. They've got stuff for your hair, face, skin, shower, even butt wipes, really everything you need. And it's all their own original stuff with premium ingredients that are delivered right to your door so you don't have to deal with those annoying trips to the store. And we want you to love Dollar Shave Club every bit as much as we do. And so we've arranged for Politics Guys listeners to get your first month of their best razor. I believe it's the executive razor. Sounds good, huh? Along with travel size versions of shave butter, body cleanser, and yes, you will even get butt wipes for just $5. And after that, replacement cartridges ship for just a few bucks a month. It's the Dollar Shave Club starter set. Get yours for just $5 exclusively at dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. That's dollarshaveclub.com/TPG. Now, how did Dreamland come about?
Well, out of that, really, I mean, before I got into this, I was doing stories on Mexico, and Mexican drug trafficking, and I could not understand why Mexican heroin traffickers were doing such big business. This was the original question that got me going on all this. As part of clanking around on that story, I began to understand the story of one town in particular. And the name of this town is Jalisco, in the state of Nayarit, small state on the Pacific coast of Mexico, where everybody who comes to the United States sells heroin and sells it retail, like pizza, like delivering heroin as if it were pizza, to where the addicts are living or near there. And so that story amazed me. And it was the idea that there would be one town where everybody does the same job. I had already seen that many, many times in Mexico. All across Mexico, you can find small villages where everybody does the same job. In my first book, I wrote a story about a village where everybody has gone out to the rest of Mexico and makes popsicles, owns popsicle shops. That you can find other villages where everyone's a construction worker. One town, literally everyone has gotten jobs as police officers in different parts of the country. And the reason for that is that in rural, Mexico, there's not access to education. So you learn your job from everybody around you. And in this town, a few families became heroin traffickers, and pretty soon everybody became heroin traffickers in the United States. So it was really as part of that, trying to figure out why it was that heroin traffickers were doing such big business. Seizures were up. Why would this be? I thought heroin was this old business, this old drug no one wanted to mess with. Come across the story of this town, and from there, I come to realize, that the reason these guys have such a big new market for heroin is because of a story I had no idea about, zero idea about it, and that was the pain revolution in the United States that held that doctors needed now to very, very aggressively treat pain and very aggressively treat it with narcotic painkillers, opioid painkillers like Vicodin and Percocet. I was in Mexico when all that happened. I really did not care to write anything about healthcare policy. I don't find it very interesting most of the time, but this story pushed me there. And so I began to realize that the reason these heroin traffickers really come second to this party, the big story is this pain management revolution that took place beginning in the mid 1990s, when about the time I moved to Mexico, in the United States. And it was at that point that I began to realize, oh my God, you have pharmaceutical companies hawking their pills in ways that aren't that different from the way these guys from this one town hawk their heroin. And to me, that all of that began to be that became a powerful idea for a story. At first, I published the story in the LA Times, where I worked at the time, about that village in Mexico. But then as the story expanded and became this much larger thing, really coast to coast, that's when I began to work on a book about it.
Now, originally, when drug companies came up with these new drugs, they marketed them right as having very low potential for abuse, didn't they?
They did, and that they were virtually non-addictive. That less than 1% of all people who were treated for pain with these drugs got addicted, and therefore the idea also grew from that. It's one thing to say that, and for a lot of people they're not addicted, but the corollary was that it therefore did not matter how many of these pills doctors prescribed, and so they, after routine surgery became very also routine, to see people who were going to have 2 or 3 days worth of pain from the surgery prescribed 30 days worth of the pills, and with refills, maybe 60, maybe 90 days, maybe huge amounts of the pills. And this was you do this over and over and over and over, millions and millions of times a year, all across the country, and you get to a point where we got to, which was this massive amount of supply of narcotic painkillers across the country in medicine cabinets, but then also a lot of that leaking out into and forming a black market as well.
Right. And so then when people run out of prescriptions or can't find doctors that are willing to do that, then they turn to drugs like heroin, presumably.
Right. And what we also didn't understand was that as pharmaceutical companies and pain specialists and so on and the medical establishment pushing this idea of a new way of treating pain with narcotic painkillers almost exclusively, that we didn't understand that another change had taken place that plays into this, and that is that our heroin market had been transformed. Before the 1980s, a very large chunk of our heroin came from the Far East, came from Turkey and Burma and Thailand and those places, came across 2 continents, across an ocean, got to New York, then it went west after that, and it got to the addicts who needed it very, very expensive and very weak because they had to come from so far away. Well, in the 1980s, the cartels in Colombia and increasingly the guys in Mexico who were just forming and becoming what they are today, began to get in on this trade, and they really just outcompeted. Their heroin outcompeted the Far Eastern stuff coming through New York. So, and they had this big Mexican border, U.S.-Mexican border to come across. So it was a lot of ways you could get it across instead of just coming through New York. And so their heroin outcompeted. It got here cheaper, and every year it got cheaper and cheaper through the 80s and into the 1990s, and it got here very potent. And so by the early 1990s, basically almost all our heroin, a very, very large percentage of our heroin came from Latin America, and increasingly today it's virtually all coming from Mexico. And that was also important because that was the alternative that people turned to. If the heroin had been like the Far Eastern stuff, expensive and weak, I don't think you'd see a lot of people going from pills to that. You might find some, but they wouldn't be as common. It wouldn't be nearly as fatal. But now we have people who see that, so you're up $150, $200 a day habit on the pills, and you see heroin is only $50 a day. Oh my God, that's a no-brainer, as many people have told me. It's a no-brainer to switch to heroin. Well, that's very potent heroin, and what's more, we kind of awakened the enormous power and ingenuity of the Mexican drug trafficking culture. Not to say necessarily always cartels. A lot of individuals are involved in this. That's what distinguishes Mexican trafficking from Colombian trafficking. It's not just big groups. It's a lot of different people doing it, and doing it from time to time, not every day, and that kind of thing. And so a lot of people, began to apply that ingenuity to how they trafficked heroin, which was not the case before this. So you had that confluence, and we went about this revolution in pain management, believing we could do it in a vacuum, that there was nothing else that might factor in here, and boy, were we wrong.
Our second sponsor today is Policy Genius. I don't know about you, but I did in fact make some New Year's resolutions, and I'm doing okay, but there are a few that already went by the wayside. And I don't know if you know this, but according to I don't know, studies, I guess, nearly a third of people every year resolve to be more financially responsible. That's a great resolution, but you can guess what happens with most of those resolutions. They, fall by the wayside, just like some of mine did. Well, here's the genius part of Policy Genius. They can help you make the smart, responsible financial decision to buy life insurance in as little as 5 minutes. With Policy Genius, you can compare quotes online to get the best policy at the best price for you. They've helped over 4 million people, and they don't just insure life, they insure everything in it. You can compare quotes for health insurance, disability insurance, renter's insurance, and even pet insurance. So they've got you covered. Now, if you did make a New Year's resolution to be better with money, achieve it at policygenius.com. It's the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. There's zero sales pressure and no hassle. And did I mention? I didn't. It's free. And that's the most financially responsible price of all. Policy Genius. Get your New Year's resolution resolved in 5 minutes. It seemed like this issue has obviously gotten a lot of attention over the last few years after getting almost no attention for the last 18 or 20 years before that. But even so, it seems like the problem is actually getting worse. There's this December 2017 report from the National Center for Health Statistics says that overdose deaths from opioids are still going up, and there's been a huge spike in deaths from synthetic opioids. And I'm wondering, why do you think that problem is getting worse, and why particularly with these synthetic opioids?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, remember, we have been aware. Some people have been aware of this for quite a long time. Families have been, that kind of thing, and some police officers and public health people have been aware of this for many, many years. But we have, as a culture, as a nation, been aware of this for about 2 years. This has been going on for 20 plus years. All of a sudden, we decide, now we're aware of it, now we want to, and we're surprised that we do not immediately solve the problem. It takes a long time. If you're going to spend 20 years creating it, you got to be adult. You got to think in adult terms, and that's not going to be 2 years. Now, what we also did was, when we began this pain revolution, and that led to heroin, was we awakened the vast profit-making impulse of the particularly the Mexican drug trafficking culture. And very ingenious, as I said, but they're also extraordinarily bottom line oriented. And at that point, if you are a drug trafficker, there is nothing that makes more sense than to traffic fentanyl. It is so cheap to make, so relatively easy. You find an underground chemist, fairly easy to make, and the profit is enormous. You don't have to do it seasonally, like with waiting for the poppy to harvest and then having some folks up in the mountains along the Pacific coast harvest it for you, all that kind of stuff. You can make it in any warehouse in any part of the world, so long as you have the chemicals. And so we awakened all that. That was dormant. No one cared about heroin in Mexico in the late 90s, early 2000s. Really, that they were all about meth, they were about cocaine. They just didn't want to. Heroin was scuzzy. Then we awakened that with this pill revolution that takes place during those years, slowly gaining momentum. And they begin, as any business people will do, to say, what will make me the most profit? Well, heroin. Let's do heroin. We know that. We've got people who can do that. And then eventually, well, actually, there's this other thing. This guy invented in 1960 over in Europe. It's called fentanyl, and they use it, and it's 100 times more potent. It's so much cheaper, and the profit is through the roof. And that is the problem. That is why it's very unlikely, by the way, that any wall will have any effect on that part of it. They keep people out. Walls keep people out. They don't do a very good job of keeping drugs out. All that stuff is coming through. I mean, because it's a very small quantity you're talking about to make a ton of money, and a few grams will make you huge amounts of money, and it'll come through the mail. And the amount that you could fit in one of those sugar packets at a Denny's restaurant, that is a huge amount of fentanyl. You could parlay that for weeks probably, and very dangerous too, of course, because it's now in powder. This is the other thing. It's now in powder form. Fentanyl pharmaceutically has never been in powder. People understand how potent it is, how dangerous it is in that form. It's always been in patches, lollipops, IVs, that kind of thing. It's never been it never been made so it'd be easy to just inhale, to come get into the atmosphere and inhale, and that's what makes it also very, very potent. But the idea is very dangerous. But the idea is that we have been at this for a year and a half, 2 years, and all of a sudden people are like, why isn't it better? Well, because it was a problem that took 20 years to fester.
Well, given how easy it is to transport and how incredibly profitable it is, I wonder if this is sort of a kind of a whack-a-mole type of situation where, maybe we can put one gang out of commission, but another one I would think would just pop right up to fill that void. I know, and like President Trump, for instance, has focused a lot on that group, the MS-13, and cutting down on gangs and that sort of thing. But I'm wondering, given the magnitude of the problem and how addictive heroin is, and everything you've said to this point, do you think that this focus on the supply side is really the right way to focus?
Well, it's not the only way to focus, but it's definitely true that we need to focus on supply. The supply created this problem, and we have a massive amount of supply. It's one of the most dangerous things in America to do today is get out of drug treatment for opiate addiction, because you get back out on the street and the supply is so potent, so scary, so cheap too. That's the other thing. It's just frighteningly cheap. My God, and so that is, I think now. The problem is, in the past, we've only done supply. To my way of thinking, this is an isolating class of drugs. It feeds on our cultural isolation that we as Americans suffer from deeply, I believe, all across, rich, poor, doesn't matter. We have an isolated culture of isolation that is drenching in this country. This drug is this poster child for that. It is the great symptom. It's the great expression because it isolates people who use it. People just want to be by themselves. It's as if this is the very embodiment of our culture of isolation, of this class of drugs. And that's why I think that the idea that we must attack supply is absolutely necessary. Law enforcement has a huge, very important role in all that, but that is not all that we need to do. We need to present, I think, a community of approaches, a community of solutions. There is no solution to this. There are many, many solutions, plural, and very few of them are sexy. A lot of them are involved the mundane, mechanics of governing and bringing together people. But what you're finding now, very exciting, very exhilarating in this country right now, and in your area in Ohio and Kentucky and so on, it's definitely the case. You are finding county by county by county all across this country. Places are forming task forces, and what's exciting about it, I think, is that they're bringing together not only the usual suspects, not just public health and cops and prosecutors and DA and all that. They are bringing together clergy, coaches, college presidents, health systems and doctors, recovering addicts. The idea being that you bring together different voices, and together you come up with a menu, a community of approaches, a mosaic of approaches that it could involve a whole bunch of different things. Changing how jail is done, medically assisted treatment, syringe exchange, all those are fine, yes, but maybe there are other things. Maybe ways of building back community are part of this. And so I believe that is happening now. And that is, to address your whack-a-mole idea, that is a template for addressing the next drug problem that may come down the pike, or maybe even not just a drug problem exclusively, but maybe the homeless problem, or maybe human trafficking, or something like that. It all sounds very Pollyannish to say, oh, well, if we all just come together and leverage our talents and leverage our energy and leverage our budgets, and through that enhanced force, we will have an effect that sounds very Pollyannish. Just work together and everything will be fine. The truth is, I think there's something to that. And the problem was we were not doing that. We haven't done that for quite a long time. And when you do that, you find that you have enormous effects. They're all in isolation. All problems, when you work in isolation, all problems seem insoluble. Together, they don't. And one example I'll just end with, your answer with, is in Los Angeles, where I live. We have an almost non-existent gang problem. We have very, very diminished gang problem, a street gang problem. It's street activity that was made famous in the 80s and 90s with drive-by shootings and graffiti and these guys taking over parks or apartment complexes. A very, very aggressive way that does not happen in Los Angeles anymore. You go neighborhood after neighborhood. There are many reasons why, but one reason is because cops are now, and all the folks in law enforcement are now in a very concerted way working together more than they ever did back in the 80s and 90s. Back in the 80s and 90s, nobody wanted to work with the FBI. Sheriff and LAPD hated each other. Smaller departments hated LAPD. Everybody wanted their credit. Nobody wanted to work together. Federal prosecutors didn't know the district attorneys, prosecutors. There was just complete isolation. That ended in the 2000s. They began to put together massive indictments, putting a lot of the worst offenders, the worst nasty gang members in prison, in federal prison through RICO, racketeering conspiracy cases, and all those guys went away. They left the neighborhoods, and now you're seeing in neighborhoods where gangs kept property values at almost effectively at zero. Now you're seeing houses sell for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. That's due to collaboration on a major social issue. So it works, and it's happening, and we'll see. It's going to take some time.
Our third sponsor today is Da Vinci. Now, I bet you've been in a coffee shop before, maybe more than one, and you've seen someone trying to hold a meeting there, those little tables and all the noise, and, I'm sure maybe there's Wi-Fi, but is it secure Wi-Fi? I don't know. Good news is that Da Vinci has an incredibly affordable solution to this really common problem. Da Vinci provides you with access to meeting rooms in well-known office locations in every city, and they make it totally easy. Just search, book, and meet. Boom. Your Da Vinci meeting room comes equipped with high-speed internet and all the presentation tools you'll need to make your next meeting a success. And it's, whether you need a day office, a conference room, a boardroom, a training space, whatever it is, Da Vinci has you covered. And best of all, Da Vinci meeting rooms start at just $10 an hour. That is a great price. Even better, yes, even better, go to davincimeet.com/TPG and for a limited time, get 50% off your first purchase. That's DAVINCIMEET.com/TPG. Terms and conditions apply. For details, see davincimeet.com/TPG. I just want to emphasize, I think that's an incredibly important point, not just for drug policy, but as you suggested, in so many social policies, that seems to be the template for success, and oftentimes, unfortunately, very difficult to make happen for various reasons. Moving on to I've heard all kinds of solutions, ideas suggested. One that seems to be, well, I'll call it creative or I don't know, out there sort of. Some people have actually claimed that expanding Medicaid has actually made the problem worse. And I actually believe in a few cases they've suggested that there's something in your book that suggests a connection there. And I wanted to ask you, is that right? And if so, what's behind this connection?
Well, it is right, but it's complicated, and it's not. It's important. People who do that need to understand that I was writing a tale that has a lot of threads. And when you focus on one thread, you're getting back to the old way, How do we treat pain? With just one thing, one pill, one kind of pill for everybody. Medicaid in your area was one way in which supply of pills was unleashed early on. People would be on SSI or SSDI. They would have the Medicaid card. And with the Medicaid card, you go to one of those pill mill docs, and those pill mill docs write you up a long list of pills you can get. You go to the pharmacy, and they fill it, and for $3 copay, and you have a huge amount of pills. And these pills, then you can use or sell or whatever. And there's no doubt in some areas, absolutely stand by this idea that there's no doubt in some areas that Medicaid helped expand these. The supply of pills. Certainly back then when pill mills were very, very common in Southern Ohio parts of Kentucky and West Virginia, and then later on Florida, et cetera. However, I think it's a more nuanced story now. That in order for that scam to work, you need a doctor who's going to go along with you. And a lot of docs don't do that anymore, and those pill mills are gone. So the Medicaid scam that I wrote about in the book that I believe had absolutely a big effect on this early on, I'm not sure that that's the case. What I do believe is the case is that we still, even today, have not changed the culture of medicine to the degree that we need to, so that pills are not the only option that you get when you go into a doctor for pain. So if you expand the amount of healthcare access that you are giving in a state, you are going to expand the number of people who have come in contact with or insist to doctors that they must have pain pills, and that doctors maybe still are a little too willing to use pain pills at the expense of and not many other options that they may or may not have available to them. A lot of times I think a lot of folks don't have a lot of other options. So when you expand healthcare through Medicaid, you also expand people's exposure to the culture, medical culture of using pills for pain. And I think that's my hunch, that's what's happened now, because in a lot of states you do not see the pill mill scam that used to be was so big in say the late 90s, early 2000s, into the middle 2000s in Florida particularly. You do see an occasional scandalous doctor, but not to the degree that you did back then. In some areas you still see it. In some areas, like in LA, you still see the street gangs, who are now no longer street gangs. They're more like business enterprises. They're not shooting up houses and making life awful for neighborhoods, but some of them still exist. And they're using Medicaid and Medicare as a way of scamming. That's happened, certainly true. But I would say that probably more likely, my hunch is, that what's happening in a lot of those states that have expanded Medicaid and seen increases in overdoses is they just get more people getting access to health care. And when they get access to health care, the culture has not changed enough to say we need a whole bunch of approaches to pain, not just the pill. Also, I have to say, in a lot of those states, Ohio, Kentucky, and stuff, thousands and thousands of people, the only way they're getting drug treatment at all is through that. So but what I don't like, I have to say, is when I read people quoting my book saying Medicaid caused all this. Well, I wrote I was very intent on writing a book that wove together all the different threads of why we were in this problem. And so it bothers me when I see people just say, well, cherry pick one part of it. If you want to get into a full discussion, I'm happy. And I did not blink. I wrote about Medicaid, but there's a whole bunch more that went into this, not just that.
So, I mean, you could just as easily say, well, veterans' health coverage caused this, or private health insurance caused this by giving people access to prescription drugs. Essentially, when what really caused it sounds like, is just a problem with the culture in physicians and manufacturers and drug distributors. Yeah. So,
exactly, and you could, precisely, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, my area. I'm in Southern Ohio, which really seems to be, to me, pretty close to ground zero in an area that it looks like to me includes Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And I'm wondering, why is it that certain areas have been so much harder hit by this epidemic?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have all the answers for you. I think early on, that area was targeted because that's an area of economic decline, Rust Belt phenomenon, Appalachian, what have you. And I think that by the early to mid 1990s, people were turning to doctors to navigate economic pain, not just physical health pain. And so people would go to doctors for workers' comp, for SSI, for SSDI, a variety of programs to get you through what was really an economic problem became also you needed a doctor for that, and you need a doctor to sign off on it. Welfare reform happened, which cut people off after 5 years, so you could have 5 years of welfare. Well, disability was for life, so a lot of people migrated from there to disability. I think that happened an awful lot in the region. We're talking about kind of a culture of relying on disability as a way really of navigating what is probably, if you look into it, the family story is most likely an economic one. But people now, kids getting out of high school at 20, 18, 20, 21 years old, they go right on to disability. Doctors are a big part of all that. And doctors in those areas, seeing this, wanting to help, not having many tools with which to help, a lot of doctors became pretty heavy prescribers of all kinds of pills, not just painkillers. So doctors were already primed, I think, and the pharmaceutical companies had that data. They were, doctors I've talked to knew that they were hit up a lot because they were already heavy prescribers of other kinds of pills, just all kinds of pills for all kinds of ailments. And so I think in part that's why it happened in that ground zero area that you very roughly described. I'd also include like parts of Virginia and eastern Tennessee probably in that whole area, in that whole map. But I think that was certainly part of it. I think there grew up in those areas a kind of a culture of pills adding to the economy of a family. So grandparents had it, the kids sold it, and pretty soon the family was kind of believing that they were doing maybe better than they would otherwise by doing it. I believe in those areas there's an awful lot of pain already, people already, and a lot of pain, a lot of coal mining, a lot of manufacturing and blue collar work. So people are, there's the treating of pain was a big part of that. I think you see that in other parts of the country as well, though. I think you see that in where this became an issue. I think parts of Maine and New Hampshire, I think New Mexico, et cetera, where these areas were some of the first that were affected. All the answers for why that is, I think I'm not sure that I have them, honestly.
Right. Do you think there's anything that we're doing or maybe misconceptions we have that might be counterproductive or making this problem worse?
Well, I do believe that our the stigma and embarrassment surrounding addiction just gets in the way. It's just such a damaging kind of damaging thing. People need to get over that and get beyond that, because even if you don't think much of addicts and you don't have any in your family, it doesn't help your region. It doesn't help to view addicts as this kind of like scourge. And what it does do is help keep it under wraps, keep the problem under wraps. So I think people need to come to a new way of viewing addicts and addiction than we have had. I think that has been fairly counterproductive, honestly. It just hasn't helped. It has gotten in the way of people coming forward, gotten in the way of people being open about it. And because of that, that's why it spread. People were not comfortable in talking about how their kid or their husband or their uncle or what have you got addicted. And so because of that, the next person didn't know that there were people around them who could help them. They thought they were all alone. And that's the worst place you can be, it seems to me.
I guess I'd like to close with, I want to get a sense of your level of optimism here. Do you think we're going to look back and say 2025 and say, wow, that was a bad time. I'm so glad that epidemic has ebbed, or what do you think?
I think we'll look back and say, how on earth did we believe that these pills were virtually non-addictive for almost everybody, and that therefore we could prescribe them in vast quantities for almost everything? And to me, that is one of the things we will look back on and like, this was the dark ages or something, just amazing. I would say a couple of things. One, it seems to me that this epidemic, though, has an enormous opportunity. That's what I told the senators when I testified. It provides us with an enormous, very positive. We need to view this it's a catastrophe. There's no doubt it's a catastrophe, but we also need to view it as an opportunity, a gift almost, through which we begin to change parts of American culture that led to this. I think it's a golden opportunity, as I told the senators, to marshal forces and begin to invest in those areas that have been left behind by globalization, left behind by free trade and all that. I think that is one major thing that we need to do. I think the Marshall Plan for Europe after World War II, for rebuilding Europe, I'm not sure why we can't have a Marshall Plan for American recovery, just as there was a Marshall Plan for European recovery back after World War II, and going in and a variety of ways of boosting this. I think it also is extraordinarily interesting, a very positive to see all these counties come together in the way that they have. And I was speaking with police chief in Bellefontaine, Ohio, talking about this. Brown County in Ohio too just had a conversation with somebody. All these things are so positive, and I think to the degree in which we can begin to understand the importance of community, of not destroying community, but instead coming together and rebuilding it, and then working together and not having this awful, debilitating siloization, I guess, of efforts and turf battles and all that stuff. And to the degree that we can come together and work together as communities again, something we got away from, really, I believe, over the last 30, 40 years, then we will look back and think, this is how it started. This started it, and maybe there's something positive to come out of this very grim catastrophe.
Well, I certainly hope so. And on that hopeful note, we will close. Sam Quinones, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for taking the time, Mike.
That's it for this Politics Guys interview. Thanks for listening. We hope you like what you heard. Listener support is really what helps keep the show going. And if you'd like to help us out, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on either the Patreon or PayPal links. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, you can share this episode with your friends and followers or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes also really does help. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com or our Facebook page, where you can message us and where we post stuff throughout the week. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.